Hello, I am Sarah from So and I am here to sew the ideal bag with you. This is the bag that all of the viewers in my chat designed. It has a ton of bells and whistles, and I'm not going to skip over any of them. There's two flap options, one that has elastic on the side, something we designed together that kind of hugs the top of your bag, and I actually really like how this turned out and how it kind of functions. It's pretty subtle, but the sewing on it, it looks kind of complicated and it's really fun to sew. It's actually really easy. And then the other flap we're going to do has a zippered pocket on it, and that's the one I'm going to sew with you as well on the sample bag. It has a couple of large pockets on the front that were designed to hold a cell phone or an eyeglass case. One has a flap. You can put a flap on either if you like. They're both elasticized and gusseted. And there's also two zippered pockets on the front with a pocket behind the shorter one. And then on the inside, it has a full-size laptop sleeve that you can pad if you like, if you want to give some, some padding to your laptop sleeve to protect your laptop or whatever you're going to put in there. It also has a cord pocket and then this zippered pocket here that is pretty nifty in that there are two pockets but only one zipper. Super easy to sew as well. And then you can fit an EpiPen in there or any other something precious that you want to keep in there. There's also a water bottle sleeve that you can customize to fit your water bottle or drink carrying thermal type of carafe. And then on the back we have another pocket that's large enough to hold some documents with a smaller section to the right of it. Then on the sides we have our strap configuration, and I'm going to show you some options if you're kind of struggling to find the right hardware for the right width of your webbing or something like that. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on that because sometimes you want to start a project late at night and you're not ready, right? So I've been there. So let's see, what else can we cover on this bag? I'm going to be sewing it on the smaller size. So the bag comes in two sizes. The full-size bag is this one right here in front of me, and then we're going to be sewing one that is 80% the same size. So if you want to make a smaller version, maybe you don't have a full-size laptop or you're a petite person, you can print out the pattern at 80% the size and you're going to get a slightly smaller bag, and that's the one I'm going to sew with you today. If you also want to configure your pockets in a different way, feel free. It is your bag. You can design it however you like. You can leave off the laptop sleeve, but still leave these pockets on here. I'll give you some tips and tricks on how to attach that. Other than that, if you're cutting the smaller size, the only thing you really need to know is cut the water bottle pocket at 100%. Or just make sure it fits your water bottle. All the other pieces you can just reduce it to the 80% size and you should be good to go. Leave all the notions the same as well. We'll just trim them to fit that's it. Are you ready? I'm ready. I'm really excited. I'm going to sew mine in wax cotton with kind of a fun twist. So let's go. Okay, let's go over all the materials and how we're going to group our items so that it's the easiest to sew. I feel like anytime I do this, it kind of reinforces what findings and notions go with each thing and I don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to go kind of in reverse order so that I can stack mine up so I'm ready to sew. So I always group all the lining pieces together, and in this case we're going to take the water bottle sleeve, both pieces, the lining for the front, the lining for the back, and if you're using the padding for the laptop, definitely put that in here. The zipper for the cord pocket, which is the longest zipper. You need your precious pocket, your cord pocket, all those pieces, and you also need the laptop sleeve, and you need all the pieces for that and the padding that you're going to use. And you can just keep all of this together as one thing because this is one unit. And then we're going to move on to the back. So for the back, you're going to have your outer back piece, your back pocket, both pieces for that. And if you're going to put a handle on the back of your bag, just like a little small handle, you want that as well. And I'm going to actually make mine narrower than this. So there's that. And next, you're going to put your sides, which is basically just one pattern piece here and then all the webbing that is associated with that. So you need the ends that go, the piece of webbing that goes across the end of the bag. You need the piece that holds the loop locks to the bag. You need those two small pieces, which I'm going to cut mine apart. And then you need your really long strap. So all of this can go together and it's one unit. And let's talk about your hardware. So say you have 2-inch wide a 3-bar slider and loop locks, but only 1.5-inch wide webbing. You can make your own webbing, and I'm going to show you really quickly how to do that. So what you do is take the pattern, the notion that you need, the measurement for that. So say you're using the 1-inch webbing and you don't have any 1-inch webbing. So take the same length measurement, and then for the width, when you cut your fabric, times whatever width webbing you want to finish, times it by 4. So if you're doing 1-inch webbing, you want a 4-inch wide piece, and you want to make it as long as the piece that it calls for, same exact length measurement. And when you go to make your webbing, this is the easiest way to do this so you don't have to sew it and turn it right side out. I promise, this is actually kind of a fun way to do it. You're going to take that piece, and this goes for 2-inch wide, 1.5-inch wide, 1-inch wide, whatever you're looking for, whatever you need to fit the hardware that you have on hand. Just multiply it by 4 to get your cut width, and then keep the same length measurement. So if you're doing the long strap and you need 2-inch wide finished webbing, you're going to cut it 8 inches wide by 54 inches long, or whatever that length measurement is that suits your size or the length of the strap that you want. And if you can't cut your fabric that long, because that's a pretty long piece of fabric, I recommend splicing it on the diagonal. And that way, when you go to sew this, you won't have a seam that kind of creates a bump in your strap, because you also want the strap to be able to slide through the 3-bar slider still. So piece it together similar to how we do when we piece together binding. All right, so when you go to make it, you're going to take your piece, your webbing, your fabric that's going to become webbing, and you're going to fold it wrong sides together and iron it really good. You want this crease right here. Now open it up and fold these cut edges towards each other, and then iron this edge really well as well. Don't iron over your first ironed edge. Now fold it towards itself, and you're going to stitch it on both sides. And I recommend stitching it going the same direction on both sides. So if you start here and go down, start on this side and go down. Don't start here, come towards you, and then flip it like this, because that would be our natural thing to do, because then you might get something that kind of pulls like this. So like I said, really easy to do, and you don't have to sew and turn this right side out. You just edge stitch it and it works beautifully. All right, and as for your hardware, say you only have 3-bar sliders and you don't have these, which I was trained to call loop locks. You can use these as your loops as well. So you're just going to put your webbing on the end of the bag like this, and then the strap on the top like this, and you still have your loop lock. No problem, right? All right, so let's see. Let's carry on. We have our sides with all our webbing and our hardware next. And now we have the front of our bag right here. So we have our gusset pockets, label if you want to put one on, the flap for the gusset pocket. You need your elastic pieces, and you also need both zippers that go for the angle pocket and the straight pocket. And you need your outer front piece. And my pattern pieces probably look a little bit different than yours because they're still in progress while I sew these samples up. But when you go to print it out and tape it together, just make sure you match up letters and tape together the lettered circles first before you cut something on the fold. There would be a marking here that says on fold, and you're going to cut that out. So that's, you're going to do that first. Make sure you note any notches, and if there's, some of these have a notch on one side but not on the other side. It's okay if you notch both sides, don't worry about that. Just make sure you don't forget to notch it. All right, and then lastly, let's put this with our strap here. Lastly, we have our flap, and we have two flap options. We have the kind of cool new flap that we designed together, the elastic flap that hugs the top of the bag. So you need an outer piece and a lining piece and two elastic pieces. and I'm going to sew a sample for you on how to do this one. And then on my bag that I'm going to sew with you today, I'm going to do the zippered pocket. So you need your under pocket, your top pocket, and then you also need the flap outer and lining right here, your zipper. And if you're doing the 80% size, make sure the zipper opening doesn't dip below 5.5 inches wide, because that's about the width of most hands, and you want to be able to get into your pocket. So that measurement could change a little bit when you go to print it out. So just remember to double check that this is 5.5 inches, and if it needs to get a little longer, extend it on either end. Don't just do it to one end or the other end, kind of center it. And you want to mark it on your outer flap, or even safer, on your top pocket. So at least mark it on this box on one of these, either the outer or the top pocket, and then you're good to go. You don't need to do it on both, just one. It's safer to do it only on one. All right, and then you just need the box. That's it. You don't need to do all these lines. So it's 1/2 inch wide by 5.5 inches long. That's your box. All right, so now we are good to go. And as for materials, when you go to cut yours out, I suggest using some sort of fabric that has a lot of body on the outside, like a canvas or a wax cotton, or if you're going to use something like a quilting cotton, I would interface it and give it a little bit more oomph to it. As for the lining, you could do you have a lot more options. You can do a quilting cotton or something lighter weight if you like, a poplin or some sort of sheeting, or even something more slippery if you like. And as far as any stiffener, I'm skipping the stiffener. I really feel like this bag has a lot going on, and adding all the pockets gives it a lot of body. So you don't really need the stiffener. It might be a little bit more cumbersome to sew. I'm only going to add the padding to the laptop sleeve and the back, and that's it. And if you want to interface everything, I would interface the outer fabric rather than the lining, but it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you like. And I think that's all the notes. I'm sure there's a ton more we're going to go over during the sewing. And I'm going to try and keep this going quickly. And just, look at it as chapters. Do your front, do your back, your sides, your lining, and the bag's just going to magically be done. I promise. All right, let's get to it. All right, we're ready to sew our ideal bag, and I'm going to be making mine 80% size. All of the sewing is going to be exactly the same. I just thought doing the smaller size on camera would all fit under the camera a little bit easier, and this lighter fabric I think will be easier on the eye as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is assemble my front. So I like to do things kind of in sections. Sometimes if it's a pattern that has just little kind of details, I just do all the details and then I assemble it. This one has a lot of bells and whistles, so we're going to tackle each section of the bag as the front, the back, the sides, and then the lining, the flap, and then we're going to assemble it. So the other thing I didn't mention is that there's a tiny bit of binding. I know you're not surprised. Anything I sew or design usually has a little bit, but we kept it to a minimum, and I think it's the easiest way to finish certain things without getting too much bulk or adding too many notions. All right, let's do it. So here's our front, the two zippers, the gusset pockets, and then the angle pocket and the straight pocket. So for the gusset pocket, we're going to add this little elastic top here. And remember, now that this is 80% size, you have a little bit less room as far as the casing goes, but I'm going to show you how to adjust things if things don't line up the same. It's not too hard at all, and all of it ends up fitting really well, and you won't notice any of the loss. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to hem this a little wider than your elastic. My elastic is 3/8 of an inch, and my hem here is about a 1/2 inch. So I just turned under a little edge and folded it over, and we're going to hem it. Both gusset pockets. The wax cotton kind of gives it a little bit of crease, kind of makes it a little easier to sew. It wants to stay there. I don't use a lot of pins when I sew, but the wax cotton actually makes it a little bit easier. Not all wax cottons are easy to sew with, and in my experience with it, it's pretty limited, but this one's pretty pliable. It's also very see-through, so you're going to see why I'm doing a little bit of a twist with my wax cotton bag today. All right, so I have a loop turner, and I find this the easiest way to get elastic through. You can use a safety pin as well. And I'm just going to stick my elastic right into the casing there. Okay, so now once you have it in there, you're going to line this up with the edge there. Just pull it right till you get to that edge. Don't let it go past, and then stitch it down. I know that you're probably doing this on a canvas or maybe a cotton that's been, a quilting cotton that's been interfaced. The wax cotton's not going to gather up as well, but it still does do some gathers, and it looks just fine. All right, so let's do our other one. Another way to do this would be just to hem right over your elastic, and then you don't even have to pull it through. All right, so now we have our 2 gusset pockets. You're going to sew your corners. So just put this short edge here on both of them, right sides together, not wrong sides. It's a little hard to tell my right and wrong side with this fabric. 1/4 inch, and just sew straight across that. Same thing over here. And there you have 1 gusset pocket. Turn that right side out. There we go. Leave that little guy there. And now do this exact same thing here, right sides together. With the wax canvas, I don't really need to finish the seams, but most of the bag will be enclosed and you won't have to finish any edges unless you choose to. All right, so now we have our 2 gusset pockets. Now we're going to sew our flap. And you're going to see my little trick right now is that my fabric is going to show through on the outside of my bag. So that's why I picked a really bold print. I figure I couldn't find a single lining that would work with this fabric. It's pretty much see-through no matter what, even if it is a 10-ounce wax cotton canvas. And so I just decided to go with it and have the details show through on my fabric. All right, so I'm going to put this right sides together. And you'll note also that my bird looks like it's upside down, and that's because when you lift up the flap, it'll be right side up. So on this particular bag, because you'd see through, it probably would have been smarter to make the bird right side up. But I just wanted to show it to you upside down so that maybe you would remember to do that if you wanted that detail. All right, so we're going to sew these edges right here, 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to trim this kind of close. I think it turns a little bit nicer when you turn it right side out. All right, now turn it right side out. And press with this with the iron if you like. I'm not going to be able to do that with the wax cotton. But it also kind of does stay pressed once I finger press it. All right, now we're going to edge stitch along this edge. You can do it however you like, whatever look you're going for. I'm going to do mine about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And kind of, there's a little gentle point there at the tip of the flap, so make sure you do a gentle pivot when you get there. There we go. Now trim up all these little threads here. Try not to handle that too much since you already trimmed it, and now just set that aside. All right, now we're going to go into a little bit of binding and our angled pockets here. So we have our top pocket and our under pocket right here. And so the first thing we're going to do is sew our zipper right sides together. So I have the coil down, and you can use any width zipper. You're going to be able to adjust this if your zipper tape is much narrower than mine, which it probably is. And I know mine's by the yard, but that doesn't matter if you used one that was a specific length. We're going to be able to trim it. So make sure that the zipper head is pointing going up the pocket right now, because you're going to have to offset the zipper heads from each other. So you want this one to go up. Put it right sides down, And if you like, if you're using a coil chain, meaning this plastic nylon style, I would hang the zipper off each side if you have it that it's long enough, or you're using the smaller bag and your zipper is a little bit longer. Just hang it off and then we can sew straight through it. Otherwise, I would center it and make sure, you know, like remember that the zipper needs to go all the way between my hands there. Don't line up the edge of the zipper so that this happens. Then you get this little angle right here. You see that? Because then you'll have to take it out. Otherwise your pocket will have to get a lot narrower. Remember, this edge right here needs to go all the way so that it lines up with this edge right here. Same with down here. This edge needs to line up with that. All right, so let's put this right sides together and just sew it with a seam that you can manage with the width of your zipper tape. You're going to probably have to move the head past your zipper foot. Now turn it right side out and edge stitch it with the zipper tape pointing down. Alright, so now we can set that. We're actually going to set it right on top of this one here. Just like that. And you can see my zipper tape is a little bit shorter than the pocket, but that's going to be okay. So we'll just kind of try and keep that lined up as best we can. And now I'm going to get my binding. I'm going to start from the back, put the binding right side to the back, to the wrong side of this pocket, and sew your 1/4 inch seam. And again, you're probably going to have to move your zipper head so that it doesn't butt up against the presser foot. Now, pull your binding to the right side. It doesn't matter that my zipper tape didn't quite make it because it's going to be inside that seam allowance anyway. We have a little bit of wiggle room there. My zippers are definitely a little longer, and it's because I just kept the same notions. And I know yours, if you're doing the bigger bag, might be a little bit more accurate, and so just make sure you place it. So now we're going to trim this so that's nice and in line like that. All the seam allowances except for the elastic hem, the hem with the elastic in it, are 1/4 inch. All right, so now we have our angle pocket just like that. All right, we set those pattern pieces aside. Now we have our straight pocket right here, and we're going to do the same type of thing, but this time the zipper head is going to go that way. Right? So now when this is on top of the straight pocket, both of our zipper heads don't end up right underneath each other. So we're going to make it so that it closes that direction. That one goes that way, this one goes that way. All right, so right sides together. And now push the seam allowance down and edge stitch. And now we're going to bind the top of the zipper tape. It's okay that your zipper is going to be have a so-called raw edge on the inside of your pocket. Most likely it's not going to matter at all because the inside of your pocket. But there's obviously nicer ways you can be finishing things if you like. Just remember that it adds bulk to the overall, the seams and the body of your bag. So you just got to be careful adding too much lining sometimes, especially when we're layering pockets like this. If you need any tips or tricks on sewing binding, I talk about it usually constantly on how to do it, and I have a couple videos about it, but I can go over it a little bit better. All right, so now we have this angled pocket, and it just sets right on top of there, and we're going to edge stitch this along this edge, and you can see my zipper coil goes straight through. If your zipper tape is right there, that's okay. You have a 1/4 inch seam there. You just need to make sure that you tack this pocket. You don't need to go through the zipper teeth if your machine can't do that. And if you have something like a brass zipper chain, brass teeth that are going into the seam, just make sure you walk your machine stitch by stitch. Just walk your hand wheel towards you to get past those teeth and kind of find the little sweet spot in between. All right, so now we have these. We have our gusset pockets. And here is our front. I picked this piece because there was a fold line right there, and I knew I'd be able to cover it up. All right, so we have our angle pockets right here, and we have our gusset pockets going to go there. So next, with our gusset pockets, we're going to sew these two together. I'm going to start trimming some of these threads and get them out of my way right now. These kinds of things come back to haunt me usually, so I like to get rid of them as I see them to kind of keep my sewing looking as clean as possible. It just kind of gives me a jump on that stuff because you never know what might come back, and you don't want to have to deal with it later. All right, so now you have your two pockets, and we're going to sew these right sides together along this edge here. So you have your two pockets side by side. You're going to go along this seam here. You're going to line up this gusset seam down here, and you're going to stop at that seam that we sewed right there. Get all those threads into the seam allowance. It's a lot easier to do it now. Make sure you back tack really good. I was cutting it really close on this canvas so I can see I have a little bit of a notch in my gusset pocket. Make sure I get that in there. And go all the way up to that seam that you sewed. Back stitch right there and just stop right there. So I'm going up to this mark right there. Now let's trim all of these threads here. Now I don't finish this edge, but if you would like to, you are welcome to. Even if you just bound this little bit right here. But what I'm going to do is press it open, and we're going to top stitch right in the ditch when we put this pocket on the bag. So if you finish this seam and it needs to go pressed one way or the other, just remember you do have to sew through it later on. So let's get rid of all these little threads so that they don't come back to haunt me right now. All right, now we have our two side-by-side gusset pockets. And we're going to now just set it into this little space right here. But first we're going to clip where we're going to be pivoting right here. So we're going to clip into this, just clip on the pocket itself, either on this piece or this side or this side of the seam. Not the seam itself, and just clip a 1/4 inch in, just a little snip, just a tiny little snip. Do it here, on each one of these, just right up to where you sewed there. And same thing here. What that's going to allow us to do is now have our 1/4 inch seam allowance when we put it onto the bag right there. It's going to be able to splay out and there won't be any type of tension there. All right, so can't remember if you have a notch right here, but if you do, your gusset pocket should line up to it. But if you don't have the notch or forgot to put it on there, maybe it ended up on the other side of the bag, you're going to take your pocket here and push the seam allowance of this little gusset down. We're going to use it as a guide, and you're going to line up that raw edge right there to the bottom of the bag, just like that, and then pull the pocket up. Pin this if you want, or clip it. Just make sure it stays firm. Get all of your threads into the seam right now. This is your final opportunity until we put the sides on. But at least at this point, this is finishing the pocket. And you're going to pivot at that spot that we did that little clip into there. Pivot right there. Let's move this out of the way there. And now just kind of rearrange this gusset. You're going to have to pick it up, pull it out of the way, let it splay at the bottom. Don't pull too hard. I'm known as a puller myself. We're going to kind of start looking at where this angle pocket is over here. And see, now when we get to this center spot right here, these two little spots that we clipped are now hanging straight down. Makes it a lot easier. Pull your gusset out. Mine's a little bit soft and kind of funny because it's wax cotton. And just kind of pull it up. Try and keep all those raw edges in the seam down there. You're going to be just barely catching them. And if you get a little bit high and you get a little pucker, it's really, don't sweat it. It's just not going to show up that much on your bag. All right. I should have tacked my angle pocket down. thought I had, totally forgot. All right, we're gonna get over here, and now one of the ways we could have sewn this is, in fact, I'm gonna stop right here. We're gonna stop just right there in the middle, and we're going to sew this right sides together. You gotta remember, I haven't sewn this bag very many times. It's a brand new design, so I'm still figuring it out too. All right, so we're gonna put this right sides together, taking your angle pocket, that long edge, just like this. Keep that seam allowance pointing down of the gusset pocket right here, and just line it up with your angle pockets. I would prefer to line this up very flush at the top right here. We need a little bit of room to top stitch that top edge. All right, so like I said, we're going down the inside pocket, line up all these raw edges. You can go all the way through. All right, so now we have this pocket, and these raw edges are going to poke into the gusset. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit better here. Hopefully yours looks a little nicer than mine. This is another opportunity if you wanted to make sure that this looked really nice. You could just bind even just this top little corner right here. You know, just put a little piece of binding there. Sew it right side. I would sew it like this. Just go like that, turn it, and then turn it under, and then you'd have a nice little clean finished edge right there, just like that. So that's one way you can use binding to kind of clean things up. All right, so now we have our pockets are attached to each other. Now we can line this up on the bag just like that. And we're going to continue stitching down on the bottom edge here. Just line it all up. You can see my pocket right here is a little shy, so let's line this shallow, the shortest edge up with the front of the bag there. Just slide it down a little bit more. Now, if you're using a wax cotton canvas, that kind of makes your machine drag, and you really can't sew on it as easy as I'm able to sew on this one. I have sewn on some of those, and they are a lot harder to use. I understand that. Just pick up your machine and kind of sew it for a little bit, and then pick it up and sew it a little bit more. Just do what you can right now. All right, we're going up to the top of this pocket here, and we're going to pivot on this binding edge. You have to stitch this down, otherwise this zipper means nothing, because see, look, the zipper, it would just be a pocket with a zipper decoration. So turn it, stitch along the top here. Now I'm going to kind of finish this edge. If your edge right here is soft enough, and if it was soft enough and you thought of it back here, you can, when we were stitching down there, you can push the seam allowance that way. Mine is not soft enough because I have two zippers going straight through my seam. So I'm actually going to go all the way up to here, and I'm going to stitch down a little bit. I'm going to stitch down the seam actually, right there. So I'm going to pivot right there, and now I'm going to stitch in the ditch of this seam right here. Or even right next to it. There we go. Got a little bit on there, and that's going to be okay. All right, so let's poke out our little gussets and kind of take a look what we got going on here. And now you're going to center this seam right here. Make sure it's straight up and down, just like this. I like to open mine up. It might behave, it might not. I can't press it because it's the wax cotton. Let's see, I'm going to press it in there, and we'll just hope that it stays like that when I go to stitch it down. All right, so here we go. Now I think the most important thing here is just making sure that this is straight. I know that's easier said than done sometimes. So just kind of eyeball it and make sure, you can even make sure it's parallel to this edge here. Yours is going to be a little bit more pliant if you're not using the wax cotton. And if you go to use the wax cotton, like I said, I am not an expert in using it, and I've ordered 10 ounce twice now, and they were so drastically different. I couldn't even use the other one. It's like a board. All right, so here we go. Here we have a little gusset pocket. I really love the size of this bag, the 80% size. All right. Now we have our flap that we're going to add. I'm going to add my label on right now so I don't forget, because I classically do. I'm just going to tuck it in right here, just like that. And now we have our little flap. And you can kind of spend some time determining where you want this, but we do want to be able to enclose this raw edge. So like I said, make sure there's none of these little threads here. Get rid of those. If you're doing something see-through, make sure there's no threads inside. And I'm gonna put it about right there. So that's about, on the full-size bag, I'd say this is about a 1/2 inch gap right here. On this one, it's maybe more like 3/8. And we're going to stitch it just right along this raw edge here at about 1/4 inch. I'm getting a little bit of tucks in my lining, and you know what? I just don't think it's going to be a big deal. No one's going to see it. So there we go. Stitch that down. Make sure, again, like I said, all these little threads are gone, and kind of push them in there. And now we're going to turn it this way, pull it down, and I'm going to trim this a little bit more. I'm going to move that fabric out of the way. Get it a little cleaner and narrower. Don't catch your bag. That would be something I would totally do. Try and get all these little threads, and now pull this down. And encase that raw edge. There we go. Now that'll help keep your flap down and whatever's inside a little bit more secure. You can add another flap if you like. And if you do, just note that this flap, if you were to sew it identical to this one right here, just know that this flap is a little wide to fit in here, that you might end up getting it into the seam allowance. So remember, it needs to kind of end before the seam right there. You can even do a little bit bigger seam allowance on that flap to fit it in there. All right, so now our front is ready, and we can set it aside and move on to the next section of our ideal bag. Ready? Okay, now next we're going to be doing the sides of the bag. And remember, you can do these sections in any order that you like up until we get to the point where we start putting the lining to the outer bag. So if you're not quite ready to do your webbing and your hardware and you're putting that off till the very end, you can just skip ahead a little bit and then come back to doing this. All right, so I have my 3-bar slider, my 2 loops, the 2 ends of my straps that are going to go with the loops there, and then we have the long strap here, and then I have these security bands that are going to go across the sides, and I highly recommend you add these because webbing is a little bit more fragile than we think, and you can't just really put webbing in a seam. You can't really, sometimes you can't even just stitch it down on the bag even if you reinforce it, because it might rip your bag. And so I have found that if you kind of give it some stability all around it, you have a greater chance of it lasting as long as possible. So the first thing I like to do is get these little guys attached to things as soon as possible, so I don't start losing them or dropping them or rooting around underneath my machine for them. So take your short ones here, put them in your loop block, and you're just gonna loop them in there and stitch it down. You'll notice that I added some ribbon to my webbing. This is a really lightweight cotton webbing. I've never actually seen something so lightweight, and I figured this would give me a little bit more body. And you also notice my loop blocks aren't even the same. They're a little bit different from each other. That's all I had, so sometimes you just got to use what you got. All right, so we now have our 2 ends there, and then now we're going to work on the strap. Okay, so I'm going to clean finish this edge, and this is the same if you made your webbing strap like I told you in the beginning of the video. You just use all these pieces just like you would webbing. Okay, so the first thing you do is sew one end of your webbing to the middle bar of your 3-bar slider. So stick it in there and give yourself a little bit of a tail, because we're going to turn this under and we're going to stitch it down. Now just make sure, I know you really want it really close to that, but you need to make sure that your presser foot can go by this bar. So give yourself a little bit of extra room. Be nice to yourself. You really want to be able to reinforce this. So I would turn back kind of a generous amount there so that you can put 2 rows of stitching. I kind of try and always encase that raw edge there. So that's what I'm going to try and do here. I think my tail there is probably about a fat 1/2 inch there. So I'm going to sew the end first, the folded end first. Try and keep that on there too so it doesn't get kind of slipping off toward me. And now I'm going to stitch along the raw, to the right of the raw edge. Right there, so I encased that webbing in there. I could have done a little better job there. You see I'm kind of slipping off there, which means it's hanging off under there. Now trim all these little threads so it looks nice, because you will sometimes see both sides, or you'll forget which side you're working with and put the wrong side out, and it's kind of immortal at that point. All right, so now we have our strap with our 3-bar slider, and you're going to take the other end. You're going to go through one of these loops, come back, don't twist it. So come back on it, now go through both of your bars, up and over the middle bar. All right, and so now at least all of these pieces are nice and secure. And now, lastly, you're gonna sew it to this bar right here. And same thing, you're gonna make sure these edges are secure. Now, if you're using a synthetic webbing, you can melt the edges. Just be careful of the fumes. I never used to, but it is definitely a pretty easy way to secure all those edges. All right, so let's stitch this down. And you can do decorative stitches like an X or a box, even stitch a triangle, whatever you like. On some webbings, it looks really nice to do some of those decorative things, but I don't think you'll really see anything on mine. I backed it with just a plain old green ribbon that I had. All right, so now we have our strap. It's ready to attach to the bag. Like I said, get rid of all these little threads that you can see. And so now take the sides here, put it right side out, and then there are these 2 little notches across the top here. And you're going to lay your webbing straight across, lining up to the top edge of your webbing to those notches. And stitch the bottom edge first. Mine is really long because remember I'm doing the 80% size bag, and I probably didn't really cut it accurate to begin with. So don't think I don't have that much hanging off. Don't worry about it. You know, my bag pattern is still a little bit in process, so I'm kind of sorting some of this stuff out. All right, so now take one of your straps, make sure that it's 3-bar slider up, and lay it on here. And you're going to stick it inside, kind of center it in your strap. And I feel like these might be a little shorter than what you're dealing with. I hope mine are shorter than yours and yours is a little bit longer, because you do need a lot of seam allowance to hang down in there, because we're going to stitch around it. And I find that really important when dealing with webbing. Webbing can pull out of a seam like just really easy, like almost on the 2nd or 3rd wearing. It's if you're putting some heavy stuff in there. So we're going to definitely reinforce this. So now I'm just going to go straight across and kind of include that loop lock end. Just like that. And now I'm going to go around this little thing, just kind of reinforce it. I'm getting kind of close to that 3-bar slider. I'm surprised it let me back stitch there. Show you that. So here we go. So I've stitched around the seam allowance of this piece that's poking down inside this band here. All right, so now don't twist this. Make sure you stay on the right side of your side. This is your side piece, and do the exact same thing. Line it up with those notches there. So the bottom edge first. And now center it in the middle, just like that. Hang as much down there as you can. Stitch across the top. And now go around and reinforce your webbing. I really can't stress that enough. It's really a bummer when you put a lot of effort into a bag, and I've sewn thousands of bags, And this is what happens, is that your webbing pulls out of the strap, because this isn't one of those quick fix-a-roos. You need to actually do some pretty serious bag surgery by taking apart the lining and taking apart your bag and then going in there and fixing it, unless you can stitch straight through onto the sides. This bag, you might be able to do that. But all right, so now look at that. Our strap is ready, and we have the sides of our bag ready. You can trim these flush if yours aren't already. And they will be ready to go when we're ready to put on our sides to our bag. Look at that. Yeah, that wasn't too hard, was it? Okay, next we're going to be doing the outer back of the bag. So all you need is your outer back, the webbing handle if you choose to use it, which is just kind of an extra little handle for the back of your bag, and then the back pocket and the lining. So let's see, we'll set our pattern pieces aside, and there should be some markings for your webbing strap here. And you can see I put a little piece of binding in mine, made it a little narrower, so I had a 1 inch of this webbing. So you're going to take those little drills. I don't know if you can see those. They're pretty faint on my fabric right there. Pencil marks. And line up your cut edge to those drills and just sew across about a quarter, let's say a 1/2 inch. And same with this end. So make sure that if you have a right or wrong side to your webbing, that you face it the same direction. Jump over here, line up the cut edge to those 2 drill marks, and then 1/2 inch sew down. Make sure you backstitch. And now pull up your handle. You can see my feed dogs are actually marking my canvas. Pull up your handle, and you're going to encase that raw edge, especially mine. Mine is pretty thready. Now, if your machine has trouble with some of these thicknesses, you're going to have to be creative. Just be really careful. Use a new needle when you start getting into these thicknesses. And if you need to go slow, just walk your hand wheel always towards you, 1 stitch at a time, while you kind of get those thicknesses sewn. So there's my little handle back there. So now let's do our back pocket. So it right sides together. There's a notch on the outer back. It might be on both of them, actually. You only need it on one side. It's right there. So we'll sew this right sides together. Just need it on one of the layers. If you put it on all, that's fine. And you only need it on one side. But you can divide your pocket however you like. So maybe you don't want to stitch down and segment your pocket. You don't have to. So now iron or press this edge here. Using the wax cotton, so I'm going to finger press it. And get that right up there at the top. Kind of rolling it in my fingers. And now I'm going to edge stitch it. Alright, so now you can start seeing my birds through the pocket. I think that's kind of fun. Lay it straight on the back, lining up the bottom edges there. Oh, it looks like I ran out of bobbin, so let me change my bobbin. Okay, I changed my bobbin and I fixed my little bit of stitching that got missed there. Now we're going to lay this on the back, line up all of your bottom edges here. And now look for that notch that was on the pattern. Here it is right here. It's about a little less than halfway over. But like I said, you can segment your pocket however you like. And what I like to do when I have these kind of blind straight lines of sewing that I have to do, I like to pull it up to the top like this and give myself a little mark up there so that I know that I'm going to start there and end here. And then that way I'm aiming for one end. So I have this there. And the other little trick I like to do is line up my my piece parallel to an edge on my work surface. So if your machine is mounted into the table, you can use your table. If your maybe your bed is a little bit bigger, just kind of use it, or you can use this edge and make sure it's perpendicular or parallel to something. Now just aim for that right there. Look at that. Don't worry about it. It might look like it's crooked, but it's probably not. And just kind of go for it. Don't go too slow. There we go. Now we have our 2 pockets here. So let's just tack the little edge at the top here to kind of secure it, and make sure you do that inside the seam allowances. All right, so now we have our back. You can see more of the lining on that. There we go. It's finished. It's got our handle. All right, next. Okay, now we're going to start tackling bits of the inside of the bag, and we're going to be getting to some of those features that you asked for. This is the laptop sleeve, the cord pocket, and the precious pocket. And let's see, the precious pocket was designed so that you could put something like an EpiPen or something that maybe you need to have always with you, but you don't really want it on the front of the bag where you're accessing those pockets all the time. This is something that's kind of zippered and secure in your side of your bag, and it has 2 pockets, so you can use both for the same thing or whatever you want. All right, so you have the precious pocket here in your outer fabric, a zipper, the cord pocket in lining and outer fabric as well, and then you have the laptop sleeve if you're using it. If you still want to use these pockets without the laptop sleeve, I'm going to show you how to do that as well. And for the padding, I'm not sure what this is. It's just leftover from a project, but you can also use something like just a cotton quilting batting or something like that. You can even piece it together. As long as you butt it up against itself and zigzag over it, it should work really great. And let's see here, you need all 3 of those, your outer, your lining, and your padding for this step. And if your zipper is like mine and it kind of goes off the sides, you need to shorten your zipper so that we can have some fabric right here on the ends so that we can turn under this pocket along the edge because of the way we're finishing it and attaching it to the bag. So I've cut my zipper about 2 inches shorter. And I'm going to take a few pieces of binding. I'm just going to cut them extra long here. And I'm going to sew them right sides together to this zipper. So I kind of made a little sandwich. You could use grosgrain ribbon, you could use bias, you can use whatever you like. All right, so I'm going to sew this down, 1/4 inch. And if you have, if it's the ends of your zipper, and it's like the part without the coil or the teeth right there, you can go all the way up to the stop of the zipper, whatever looks the nicest to you. And so now I have this just little fabric edge here. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm going to cut this seam off here, cut a couple pieces. Just make sure that you're allowing enough to make sure that your zipper now can go across the top of the pocket, and that you've given yourself enough room on either side of your zipper, between your zipper and the pocket, because we're going to be turning under this edge just like this and top stitching it down. All right, so okay, we've got that there, and maybe I'll just top stitch this because I can. If you can't because your teeth are in there, don't worry about it. There we go. All right, so now I have my zipper with the fabric extension. So you just need to decide now which way you want your zipper to close. And you're going to put it right sides together to this pocket. Now center it, so make sure that if you have a lot extra hanging off like I do, that you center the zipper, because you really need to make sure that the zipper stays away from that edge, because you have to be able to fold it under. All right, so we're going to sew this right sides together. Like I said, grosgrain ribbon or anything that you have lying around. It's going to be inside your bag and close to the sides of the bag, so it won't even be noticeable. All right, so we have that secured. Now we're going to edge stitch it. There we go. And now I'm going to true up this edge here, kind of carry that up there. You can see I have a kind of a ding in my canvas there. I was getting really low when I cut this out. All right, so now let's finish let's keep doing this. We're gonna bind this top edge of the zipper. So we're gonna go right over that. And this is my little binding tutorial. I start from the wrong side of whatever I'm binding. I sew it at the seam allowance that's intended for the width of the binding I'm using. In this case, we use 1 3/8. Gonna move your zipper head away. And now you're going to turn the binding towards the right side of the project. If this is sticking up a little bit too high, just trim it off right there. My binding is just barely wider than my zipper tape. And now turn that binding right over. You want to fold it just past that first stitch line that you just did. You're going to cover it up. I know everything on mine looks pretty covered up because it's all cream and it's really probably really hard to see. But if this were a darker color and you're using a contrast thread, this is why you would want this little fold of your binding to go just past that first stitch line. Now remember, it's not going to matter at all what the binding looks like on this side because it's going to be top stitched to the bag. So it's just a great opportunity to practice. All right, so let's trim that off. All right, so now we have our precious pocket. So now let's finish the top edge of our cord pocket. So you're going to sew this right sides together. And if you wanted to bind this as well, you could just put these wrong sides together and bind the top edge. You also don't have to line this piece. It just depends on what kind of base fabric you're using. You can cut your bag however you like. But if you're getting low on fabric, this is one of the areas that you can probably cut out some fabric if you have something that has enough body to it, because this is going to get stitched to the precious pocket, and it's going to get stitched to the back of the bag and the laptop, or the laptop sleeve, depending on which way you go. So it is going to have some oomph to it, you know, it's not going to be flopping all over the place. All right, so now we're going to edge stitch this top edge. So now we have our cord pocket. I can see some paper in there. Don't want it to be that noticeable. Now we're going to set our precious pocket right on top here. My binding's kind of pulling it in there. And now I marked my center right there of the precious pocket. Now you can segment your precious pocket however you want. But first off, we're going to stitch this down to the cord pocket. So you're going to go stitch right across the edge of your binding. Don't forget to do this, otherwise the zipper is just decoration. All right, so stitch along the binding edge here. I'm going to pull mine a little to kind of make that binding not draw in so much. All right, and so now we're going to segment our pocket. Now, this is where we're using one zipper for two pockets. It's kind of a nifty little trick I discovered a long time ago, that I'm going to sew up all the way up to the top of the pocket, but not through the zipper. And the only way things could pass through is if they went right through this little tiny spot right here. All right, so I start from the bottom. This is kind of the same thing as before. You kind of want to find a little spot. You can fold it, maybe make a little crease right there, and then you have it, you know, maybe put your finger there, and then just put your foot and needle at the start and look at the spot where you want to go. Kind of like mountain biking. You don't look at the hole, you look at the path, right? Now back stitch right there, just like that, and stop right there. And so now we have two pockets with one zipper. Just like that. All right. Okay, so now let's trim this up a little bit. I got mine's a little bit wonky right there along the lining side here. It's the lining edge. Just trim all this. This is the only thing that it sews to. These pockets stay together. So just keeping them all the same shape, this edge. And like I said, my patterns aren't quite set yet, and I've been cutting these out over and over again. And also I'm getting really low on fabric, so I'm kind of cheating a little bit here and there, which is fine by me. All right, so now this pocket is ready to go, and we're just going to turn this edge under, top stitch it down. So let's get our top sleeve ready, and let's talk about that for a second. So there's two ways to go about this. You could just stitch this pocket to the back lining of your bag, and let me pull that guy out right here. It's right here. So if you wanted, and you're not doing the laptop sleeve at all, and you still want these interior pockets, you can just center them on the back, stay away from the seams, and stitch it down. You can even put it a little higher if you like. Just remember, if you put things heavy in here, it might make your bag do this. So that's why I kind of put these things a little bit lower inside the bag. So make sure you get it centered. You know, I can see a fold there, so I'm kind of lining that up. And remember, this looks like it's close there, but we're going to turn this under and stitch it down. So you have plenty of room right there. All right, so that's the inside back that you would stitch this to. But we're going to put it on the laptop sleeve in this example, and you could sew this whole thing together and then attach it, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna attach it just to the outer fabric here, so it's a little easier to manage. And this is another one you're gonna eyeball a little bit, so you're gonna kind of make sure this is centered, and I'm just looking at these points here in relation to these little cutouts right here. Just remember, it's going to be on the inside of your bag. You're really not going to notice if it's a little bit crooked, okay? Just be nice to yourself. Just go for it. Or draw it on there and make sure you got it. Now, you could pin this, and I would just kind of pin it in the middle. And maybe what I'll do is pin it. I don't want to pin through my canvas on the these pieces here, so I'll just pin it underneath, just to kind of give myself a little bit of stability. All right, so now I'm going to turn under this edge a little more than 1/4 inch. It's got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just going to turn under what seems the easiest. Let's get rid of these threads though. This perfectly straight, don't worry about it. Now when you get to this corner and you turn under this edge here and then you turn up this, it might flip out right there. So sometimes it's a little easier to turn up the bottom first in this case and then turn the side. And it's just because of the way this particular angle is. It won't be the same over there. All right, now pivot at the corner, turn on this edge. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I can get my pin out right now. I'm realizing that probably wasn't the best place to put my pin. Get this all nice and relaxed. Get this pin out here. We've got enough stitched down now. All those threads under there. The thing is, my making this look a little easier because the wax cotton is a little bit grabby. It kind of sticks to itself. And see this side, the angles are the easy way. So when you fold it as you're coming to it, it should be the right way. It won't like poke out on the sides as bad as it does on the other side. Kind of like my awl to kind of smooth these little edges here. Always stop with your needle down and pivot. All right, now I have a little boo-boo right there on my canvas, so I'm going to just turn this back a little bit more. Let's get rid of some of these threads. If there was a way I could make my machine leave less of a tail, I would. All right, so there we go. Now we have our 2-pocket precious pocket, and we have this cord pocket back here for all your charge cords and things like that. All right, so now we have our laptop sleeve almost done here. So let's put the batting, get rid of all this stuff here. We're gonna put the lining and the batting right sides together at the top edge here. And I'm gonna sew this from this side, not the batting side. The batting tends to ooch. It's probably gonna be a little bigger than my pocket by the time I'm done. It almost drags more than the canvas. All right, so 1/4 inch seam, and now same thing we've been doing. Turn it, press this top edge, and edge stitch it. Now obviously this 80% size bag isn't gonna fit the full size laptop, but it would still fit a lot of laptops, or maybe an iPad or some other tablet. Maybe you leave it unpadded and it's just a place for you to put folders or documents. Just using it as a separate section that has the 3-dimensional gusset at the bottom kind of gives your bag some divided sections. All right, so we've top stitched across the top there. And now you're going to sew these cutouts. Like I said, mine gets a little bit misaligned. That quilting batting can kind of be a little problematic. So now put these right sides together, your outer fabric, right sides together. And so 1/4 inch seam all the way down, just like that. And do the same thing on this side. Line all these edges up. Make sure it's all nice and flat up here. This is more key than it is down here. You can kind of correct some of these imperfections. Just note that this is where the seam I'm most concerned with because it's the smallest of the bunch. Smallest meaning these aren't lined up here, right? This is a little bigger. If I went by this edge for my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I might not catch this piece in. So if this was my smaller one, I'd go by it. I'm going by this one here. Yes, I am fudging, but you know, that is what happens. There are ways to prevent that, but we're kind of not talking about those types of things right now, right? We're just getting our bag sewn. All right, so now we have our laptop sleeve and we have our gussets there. And we're gonna do something kind of similar with that we did to the other gussets. We'll clip this right here when we go to sew it to the inside of the bag. All right, hey, we're getting there, aren't we? It's so exciting. Okay, now we're going to assemble the inside of our bag, including the laptop sleeve to the inner back. So I have my sides, the lining piece. I have my water bottle sleeve, which is the outer fabric and the lining. I have the front lining, my laptop sleeve with pockets, and then I have the back and the padding that I'm using on the other side of my laptop. So I'm gonna put my back on top of this padding. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch this laptop pocket and sleeve to this back here. And so we're going to clip into this edge here, the raw edge, just 1/4 inch right along that seam. Just like that. Just 1/4 inch right there. Make it a little more obvious and cleaner. And same thing here, not on the seam, just next to it. You just need somewhere for it to be able to spread apart when we get to that pivot point when we go to attach it. Okay, so now again, we're going to use this seam allowance here as kind of a guide in how we're lining it up. So line up that cut edge there to the bottom cut edge of the bag here. See, so I'm lining up this gusset edge to that edge there. Just like that. Just lay it down there flat. And, sorry, it's being a little fussy for me. It's a lot of thicknesses now because of our quilting cotton. And in fact, if you want to make this a little easier, you could stitch along this perimeter edge just like this. It'll flatten the seam a little, and it also keeps it from creeping, right? So I'll just go around and do that a little bit. This isn't something I would normally do, and I think it's a really great idea. It's kind of being kind to your sewing self, and why not, right? Ensure success. Flatten it out. Just try and stay inside your seam allowance, your 1/4 inch there, and make sure you get all these layers nice and flat. I'm going to trim this a little bit more even here. Pivot here, and again, just keep sewing that, get all those layers. I'm kind of trying to straighten them out as I go. And if you have some edges you want to trim off, go for it. All right, so now we're going to attach it to the back lining. So like I said, you can see it's already kind of splaying right there. That's great. Let's just help it along a little more, because now that I've stitched it through, we'll do this one too. All right, so now we're going to line up that raw edge down there at the bottom like that, there, and then pull the bag up. Be kind of firm about that, because you don't want this to start lower than it should. Otherwise, you're going to run out of room and you're going to be easing your bag. And in fact, it's kind of a good idea to start a little bit higher than you think, because most likely it's going to push down. All right, now just stitch through all these layers and stay inside your seam allowance. Pivot at that cut, or at least close to it. You don't have to pivot right on it at the top of it, because remember, you're trying to stay inside that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And the same thing when you get over here, just line up these raw edges. I'm going by the lining piece there. I kind of like flatten it like this, and then I hold it, and it kind of wants to stay a little nicer. Now just make sure you're lining up all those raw edges together. The shortest one should make sure you're including it, because you don't want one layer to slip out of the seam, and you don't want to discover that, you know, 2 weeks from when you finish the bag. Boy, has that happened to me. All right, so now I'm pivoting here, and I kind of move it around a little bit, loosen it up. I'm kind of smoothing these fabric edges out just to make sure I caught them. Now I kind of push it in there, because these thicknesses, they really want to fight against you keeping things lined up. All right, so now we have our laptop sleeve in there, just like that. That's a nice little pocket there with our other pockets. Okay, and so now we have our front and our sides and our water bottle sleeve. So we're going to sew our water bottle sleeve now. So this is a good time to make sure yours is going to fit your water bottle. So, you know, put it around your bottle and make sure that you can, you know, easily get your bottle into and out of it. Remember, it's going to sit across this side, just like this, right? Just like that. And you need to allow your seam allowances there as well. So you're going to sew along the 2 long sides, right sides together. Now turn it right side out. I didn't backstitch, so now my seam is probably going to separate at the ends there. Just like that. And now we're going to edge stitch that edge. So if you need to press it, go for it. And now you can decide, like, what side's going to face out, right? It looks like I went with my lining facing out. You could have made this piece in both pieces in lining. And there we go. All right, so now take your sides and find those notches. They were the same notches we used to line up the strap on the sides there. And lay your water bottle to the top of that notch there. I'm going to move mine down a little bit lower and stitch it. I know how tall my water bottle is and kind of skinny, so I know that I wouldn't want it to slip out underneath. All right, so how much down did I go? Oh, I barely went down. All right, stitch on this side, just like that. And so now you have your sides. Now, the way we finish this bag, because we decided not to bind the seams on the inside, is that we're going to sew the lining right sides together to the outer bag, and we're going to turn it through a hole right in the middle here. So you have to remember to leave yourself a hole. And I'm going to leave kind of a big one. If you're doing the bigger bag and you have it's kind of stiff, I would definitely leave yourself even a bigger hole if you like. You're going to shut it later, and we're not even going to hand sew it. So all right, so now let's start with our front, since that's kind of the easier one, since it's not that big heavy piece there. I'm going to leave the hole at the bottom of my bag on the front side, mainly because when I look down into the bag, actually, yeah, I'm going to do it there because it's going to be a lot easier to shut that hole than it would be against this big thick piece here. So there we go. Originally, my rationale was that I felt like I would be able to see the seam of that more than this one, but I don't think that was true either. All right, so 1/4 inch seam allowance, and there are corner notches right here, and this corner notch goes 1/4 inch above the edge there because it's at the seam line, right? Now, because we've sewn this water bottle here, it may have stretched out that little bit there or tightened it up depending on what your fabrics are. So you're going to pivot at that notch. If you get a couple tucks in your lining, don't sweat it. Unless you're selling this bag, which I don't think you're going to, you really don't, you're not going to see the tucks in there, so don't sweat it. We're going to focus more on getting our sides nice and smooth on the outer bag rather than on the lining. All right, so here's one of those notches indicating that I need to leave this open. So back stitch at that notch, hop over to the next one. I'm going to place this notch at that corner. Hop over to the next one right here and pick back up. Make sure you back stitch. Pivot at the corner again. I leave my needle down and then I pull it like this and I line it up at the top. Just like that. And I'm always lining it up. Remember, the front has this gentle curve at the front edge there. So this is where you're lining it up at the 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top. Okay, that matched perfectly. And now this one's probably gonna be a little trickier. I'm just gonna warn you. Because it's so thick, it's going to want to pull up the fabric, and it's probably gonna be a little harder to get it to go all the way around. All right, so now we're going to sew this right sides together, and we don't have to stop and leave a hole this time. We already have our hole in the front. So now's a good time. Make sure this is all in there, and you have all the threads going towards your seam allowance. You're going to line up that corner notch again, same thing. I'm kind of walking my machine. That's why you keep hearing me lift up my presser foot, because it is pretty thick. Helps me kind of ease it in there. So I'm pivoting at that notch. And if you have trouble, getting this to pivot, this is the easy piece. Always do your lighter weight fabric on top for this step. This one wouldn't pivot as much as this one will. I can really manipulate this. So I lifted up my presser foot, and this gusset here is kind of pushing up against me. So I'm gonna kind of pull that so it's a little flatter like that. And then I'm gonna move this. See, there's a little bit of a bump right here. So push that down. You don't wanna get a little tuck in there. Don't pull on this. Don't pull on your lining. Keep it nice and relaxed, but try and get it in there. I feel like I'm about to run out of bottom thread. Okay, now I've gone a little bit of the way, right? And now I'm gonna look ahead. Where is my other corner notch? It's right there. So let's look at our corner here. A little messy, eh? Let's trim some of this off so we can see it a little better. There it is. I can see that fabric in there, right? This little pivot point got a little high up there, but that's okay. It really isn't going to be a big deal. So here's my notch right there. And another way to check, you know, because I want this 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. Here's the edge. Let me try and straighten it out for you. This is the edge. This is the notch. That notch is 1/4 of an inch because I pivot at the seam line there. And then this needs to match up at the top right here. Just like that, right? I know how tricky this can be. I really, really do. I have my issues all the time with it. The one I sewed earlier didn't even line up and I cut 1 inch off the top. And then the whole bag went together just fine. So I have my moments too. I just made sure that that inch right there at the top was the same on the one edge as this edge. Rather than it being perfectly flush on one edge and 1 inch on the other. So, all right, so now line up those edges. And see, I'm ignoring this. This is more important to me, this lining right here. Line up those edges. And now I need to get that in there. See, it's a little bit slack because my water bottle stitching kind of stretched it out a tiny bit. So let's get it all in there. Walk it. I'm using all, I think I just ran out of bobbin thread. No, I didn't. All right, get your awl and I kind of push it against. I know my machine really well, and I know how high of a pressure I have pressing down on my pressure foot. I really like a lot of pressure so I can hoik on things under the needle without it pulling out from underneath. And I know also that, you know, the feed dogs are kind of pulling the fabric like this, you know, going that way. And the presser foot's, you know, is gliding across the top. So you've got these two opposing forces, essentially, and that can cause misalignment. It's usually really what is your trouble, is your machine's kind of working against you. Okay, so there we go. We have our lining. We have our hole right there. The whole bag is going to go through there. You don't need to turn those corners. Don't worry about it unless you really, really want to. If you use a fabric that's really stiff or a little bit harder to use, especially on your outer fabric, because that's more likely, you might want to clip right here, like where that notch was. Make sure the clip goes all the way to the corner, and that'll help it lay nicer. All right, so there is a little bit of this messy edge, but I'm not going to worry about that. It's coming inside. So I'm going to leave this for now. I can't remember if I turn it right side out or not. So next up is the flaps. We're getting there. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to sew both flaps, and this is the elastic flap right here. I'm going to be putting the pocket flap on the bag that we're sewing together. So I'm just going to show you kind of a smaller version of this flap with some pocket or some bag pieces as well. So I've got the elastic pieces that I need. Just use the same exact length that you would for the full size. And then I have a back right here of the bag. I know ours has a pocket on it already, but we're going to pretend like it. And then these are just kind of fake ends, the sides there, right there. So I'm going to sew the flap first. So the first thing we're going to do is take our flap right sides together, the lining and the outer. And remember, you need notches about right here that the elastic is going to go to. Okay, so we're going to sew around this edge, not the corner pieces, just the long perimeter edge at a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to back stitch right there too. Ah, there's my bobbin. All right, carry on. All right, so now we're going to do this kind of there's a lot of ways I could have had you do this, but I'm going to try and do this way that I think is probably the easiest and safest way to go about this, because it is a little bit awkward, but you're going to be pretty shocked at, in a way, it's kind of easy. So we're going to pull the elastic from that edge to that notched edge, and I'm going to sew it in the seam allowance here. All right, so we're going to lay this on here, just like that. I'm going to sew straight down the middle. I'm even going to back tack a little bit. So I'm just lining it up with that edge, and now I'm going to pull. My needle is down right now. And you're just going to do your best here. Don't worry if it's a little bit different from one side to the other. And now, remember, you're not pulling on your needle. You're just pulling the elastic and trying to keep it as consistent as possible as you sew. If your machine doesn't like sewing through elastic, you're going to have to be really cautious here. If you don't want to sew through the middle and you just want to tack it at either end, that works as well. I'll try and show you a way to do that on the other side. All right, so you're going to see it kind of rumple up. Now I'm holding the elastic a little past the notch right there just so that when I get up to it and I let go, it kind of snaps in place. Like I said, you can be a little bit inaccurate. All right, so there we go. Now on this side, let's see here. How can we do this so that we don't have to? We're just going to tack it at either end and backstitch. Just like that. Pick it up, move it. Keep it in the seam allowance. There we go. And now we're going to turn this right side out. And if you want to press this long edge, you can go for that. Trim it and press it. Make it look nice because we're going to edge stitch it. I'm going to kind of do it the quick and dirty way. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this little edge that we've sewn the elastic to, right? Pinch it like this, make it nice and flat like that, right? And now sew across this elastic end. Trust me, you don't want to skip this. Just like that. Just sew across the elastic end there. Do it on the other side as well. The elastic is now turning towards the flap, all right? Just kind of push it in there like that. Sew across the end. All right, now let's top stitch. So we're going to encase our elastic in kind of a little casing, and then we're going to jog back over to the perimeter edge and edge stitch. So we're going to start right to the left of wherever our elastic is, okay? Get your machine going, and now arrange the flap. I'm going to now do a better job of pressing it. Just like this. This fabric isn't as cooperative. Now you see how this is rumpling a little bit right there? I'm going to put my awl in there and kind of pull it. So I'm going to just stitch to the left of the elastic. And when I get to the end of the elastic, you can feel it in there. Right before you get to the end, just pivot and go across the end of it to the edge of the flap. And now edge stitch your flap. I kind of glossed over that part about, prepping your edge here. So if you want to trim it and iron it, go for it. This is just one I'm going to end up probably throwing away. I'll probably keep it as an example, actually. All right, so here we go. Coming around, and now we're getting up to our other elastic side, so let's feel for it in there. Here's where, this is the one I didn't stitch through, like, through the middle of the elastic. So I feel that elastic in there, and because I didn't stitch through on the seam allowance, the elastic wants to bow into the flap itself, so you need to make sure you keep it along the edge here. Keep your edge stitching going. Come up to that elastic right there. Go across the end of it, just past it, past the width of it. Because we're making an elastic casing, and see, like I said, it's kind of crumpling right here. Just kind of pull your, just do your best there. The gathers are going to cover up any of the little weird stuff there. You're just sewing to the left of your elastic right now. Just like that. See that? It's going to hug your flap to your bag. keeping it more secure, nothing slipping out the top on the sides there. All right. Okay, so now we have our back here. Remember, pretend like it has the pocket that you already sewed, and go to the end. Oh, I don't have the notches. Oh yeah, I do. There's the notch right there. There's a notch right here. Your handle is there as well. And now lay your flap. Line it up. Raw edge. Here's the notch right here. Raw edge to that notch. Raw edge to this notch over here. Just like that. And now you're going to sew straight line. So I'm going to get it going like this. And now I'm going to kind of line up this edge over here to that notch just like that. Hold it, and I'm going to kind of pull on it and make sure it's nice and straight. And you can kind of make sure that this right here, this section, is a nice parallel amount. All right, so there we go, is our raw edge there. And now we're going to pull it up and press it. And let's see, I'm going to stitch it twice this time. On one sample I didn't, and I think it's a little easier. So I'm going to edge stitch the flap up. Don't worry about the raw edge still showing. Don't worry about that. We're not encasing this raw edge the same way we did on the gusset flap. So I have an edge stitch there, and now I'm going to do another one, and I am going to encase it. So just make sure you stay, don't matter how far away you want this. You want to encase that edge, but I think the higher up you go, the better it looks on the bag and the way the flap works on the bag. So this is your top of your back, right? So if you want your flap to kind of peel away as much as you are seeing right now, just stitch it again enough to encase that raw edge. But I'm going to actually stitch mine a little higher than that. So just as long as I stay inside this little notch that we still have right here of the bag, just stay up to this flap edge right there. And try and do a nice parallel line again. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to fold the flap back down, and you're going to line up these corners here. Mine is a little bit not lining up there. Why is that? So my tip with this is, so when you fold this, it might be a little more obvious on this side since it lines up better. Let's get rid of some of these threads so it's not a lot to look at for you. Okay, so this is that notch, right, of your flap. This little corner notch, right? So we're going to fold it at the corner of there. Line up these raw edges. Now you see where this little angle is. Your 1/4 inch seam is going to end about right. That's great. You want this to kind of end at least 3/8 of an inch away from this edge right here, which is the top of the bag. So this little angle, when you sew it at a 1/4 inch seam, is about right here. And that's about a 1/2 inch away from the edge. That's perfect. So you definitely want at least 3/8 of an inch. On my other side, it looks a little bit misaligned, so I'll have to probably monkey around with that one. So we'll see how I do that, so you get some tips and tricks for that. And then the reason it got a little bit out of alignment is probably when I was just now top stitching it, it wanted to creep out a little bit. Now because we stitched down our elastic, this is making this step a lot easier, so I hope you didn't skip that part. All right. So this is in the seam allowance. I know it's a little wider than a 1/4 of an inch, but you know, this is your seam allowance, so no one's going to see this right here. All right, so let's look at this one here. So I'm going to fold it down a little bit. I'm just going to fold it a little more because my bag is sticking out a little bit, and I really need this angle to be at least 3/8 of an inch away from this edge right here. Not this edge, this edge. And remember, this is the seam line right here. And then make sure you line up all these raw edges over here. And let's trim this and make it look a little bit less crazy. There we go. All right, and so now this flap is on the bag and you are set to continue on with assembling your sides and all that. So, you know, you put the sides on just like this. When we do all the way around the sides, you'll have this nice, clean finished. Oops, I have my little stitching is showing there. So make sure you get it in your 1/4 inch seam allowance there. And then once you sew your lining to the bag, which we're going to do in a second, you then will have room here, because you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam gone. You have room barely for the top stitch around the perimeter edge. So that's why I say you want at least 3/8, not a half of that seam right here exposed still. Same thing on this side. And so now this flap is ready to go. There you go. Nice and clean. Look at how misaligned mine is. This looks so nice, right? That stitching is going right into that casing. But it isn't over here. Things happen. But, you know, that's probably why my little bag got a little bit misaligned. Is anyone going to see both sides at the same time? I doubt it. So, you know, be nice to yourself. All right, so now let's do our other flap. Let's put this one aside. So now we're going to do the zip flap here. So you have your lining, your zipper, your pocket pieces. All right, so let's see. This is your under pocket, and it doesn't have the slit in it. You can see mine has that drawing on there. The top pocket does. Now you can see also that I drew my square on there. And I kind of am just taking one for the team here by putting marker on my bag there. You might want to use something that you know is going to fade or wash away. This is wax cotton. I'm not sure if these washable markers really will, but I'm going to try and keep that marker inside my box. So, all right, so now we have your zipper. My zipper is a little wider than the standard zippers you buy at the fabric store. And it will be a little bit tighter, because you can see, look at how big my coil is to fit inside that box. So when you're using the store-bought zippers, they can be a little bit easier to use when it comes to this. Just remember that you want your pocket opening to be 5.5 inches long. If you need it to make it a little bigger because you're doing the smaller size bag, just extend it. I had to extend it 1/8 of an inch on each end. Okay, so let's see here. Let's see here. Oh, now I got my pockets confused. Let's get my pattern pieces out here. Under pocket and the top pocket. All right, so you're going to use the notches that were on your flap and line up your pocket. Just like this. And you're going to sew on your square that you drew. So if you wanted to, I knew mine was see-through. I think drawing your square on your pocket is a better bet. So here we go. I'm going to start in the middle of my box there. Hope you can see my box. You probably can't see it, but it's right here. It's orange. And I'm going to start, so here's my end of my box, and here's the beginning, or, you know, here's my two ends. I'm going to start in the middle. And I'm going to encase the line I drew in the box. And we're very close to the edge of our lining there, so we have to be really careful. There we go. And now we're going to cut our box right down the middle. So get it going. Stop about 1/2 inch away and cut into the corners. This is just this, I know it looks like a nice tidy slit in the drawing with the, you know, the classic Y shape there. It doesn't actually matter how long or whatever. You just need to make sure, the key with this whole thing is making sure you clip right down into that corner. You're gonna go all the way into that corner. Don't be shy about this if you really want a nice looking box. And make sure you don't cut your lining other than this. So just make sure. All right, and now you're gonna turn your lining to the inside of the bag. Just like this. This will be a little easier probably on the full-size bag. Now you're gonna get your nice crisp edge here. I can tell my zipper is probably going to be a little too long for this. I'm a little too close over here. Probably didn't get it quite in the right spot. You need that seam allowance right there. But I don't have any more fabric, so we're going to make this work. All right, so if you can iron yours, iron it. This is how it looks on the right side. This is the very budget way to do a zippered welt. Okay, and so now you have your zipper and you're gonna place it under here. Wish I could iron. Let's pull on this a little bit. Like I said, I have very little clearance here. I may need my zipper foot in order to stitch down my pocket. Let's get this nice and crisp. And wax cotton kind of help me out here. I have a very chunky zipper for this. And now we're going to edge stitch this opening, keeping the zipper in there. And I'm going to put my zipper pull pointing that way so that it closes at the top of the angle. Let's see, how much zipper do we have on each end? Okay, we have plenty. So hopefully I can get, if I could iron this, I think I could do a little better job. I'm just going to focus on where I want this to end up on one side there. Just center my coil in there, and then I'm going to start sewing. Now that I have my machine on this, it can help me do the job. It's like a helping hand. Pull my lining out. Pull the zipper, pull past the zipper foot. If you need to pull your lining a little bit, do so to make sure it's not creeping out. Pivot at your corners. And when you do that, make sure that these little ends here are perpendicular to your long legs. Kind of just makes it look more crisp. All right, so pull your lining. Remember, I can go straight through the coil chain of my zipper. So if you can't do that, be really careful going past the teeth of your zipper. Move the zipper head again. So I'm just kind of pulling on this lining under here a little bit away from the edge. My lining is very obvious when it's showing. I have very little to grab there. I did pretty good getting rid of the marker. Oh, see, now I just got pushed off there, so now I have a little bit of a bobble. All right. Oof, yeah, I do have a little bit of a bobble. We're not going to worry about it. All right, so now we have our zipper in there, just like that. Hope yours went better. And now you're going to put your pocket lining back here, just like this. And we're going to stitch it down. I'm going to stitch from the right side because I can see mine, but you can stitch from the wrong side on the inside of your flap, just like this. Just remember your bobbin thread's going to be what shows. That's the other reason I like stitching from the right side. I can feel this through even if I couldn't see it. So now we're going to stitch this down. This is all going to get encased in the lining of the flap, so it doesn't need to be serged or anything like that. Remember, you might be going through zipper, so be careful. There we go. There's our zippered pocket. Just like that. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so let me trim my zipper tape right here. since my bag is pretty much see-through. It's my glass bag. All right, now we have the other bit of our lining. We have our other piece of our flap, with the lining. So put this right sides together and sew around the perimeter at a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to back stitch there. I keep missing my back stitches when I go to turn it right side out. All right, so now we're going to turn the flap right side out. And we're just going to top stitch that perimeter edge. And then both of our flaps will be ready, whichever one you're doing. Let's roll my edge here a little bit. All right. Because I'm doing the wax cotton, that's why I'm getting away with not ironing, and it's kind of like letting me do this edge stitching with very little fuss. I'm not magic, I promise. Oh, one thing I wanted to note is if you are, you know, when you're right-handed, you typically wear a messenger style bag like this one so that the bag is sitting on your left side, and that is how I angled the pocket. If you wear the bag on your right hip, you might want to put this pocket on this side over here. Little wonky there. All right, so now we have our flap. Perfect, with our zipper pocket, just like that. And we can put a little lip gloss in there, a little cash, your ID, maybe if you have a smaller phone, or if you want a bigger pocket, you know, you can just make all these pieces a little taller. You know, I didn't want to make the whole flap a pocket because then things kind of rattle around in there and they're really hard to find. So, all right, we are getting down to the wire. It's almost time to put the bag together. All right, now we're going to attach our flap to the outer back, and then we're going to put our whole outer bag together. We only have a few more steps. Okay, so you're going to take your flap, and it's a little different than how the elastic flap can line up to the raw edge here. So you're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to center your flap at these notches here. So this raw edge is in line with the notches here, and you're just going to center it left and right. Like this, and we're going to now stitch it down just like we did the elastic flap. So I'm going to get it going, and I'm going to go over here and line it up. Keep all these threads towards the seam. All right, so I'm kind of keeping an eye on this space right here, making sure I'm keeping it nice and parallel. The handle is a little bit in your way, but you should have plenty of room to get by it. You might get a little bit of tucks in your lining, especially if you're like my fabric. This fabric right here is very rigid. It's not very forgiving, whereas the quilting cotton can be a little bit more relaxed and pliant, so then it ends up creeping. All right, so I'm going to get rid of some of these threads since my bag is pretty much see-through, that even if I encase them, I might see them. Well, maybe I won't actually. I won't. The flap will cover them up. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to flip this up. And I'm going to edge stitch it first, right along that seam. I'm going to fold my flap as it goes under the head of my machine so it doesn't get hung up on anything. Because sometimes what happens is if you're something going under your machine gets stuck on an edge, it'll make your sewing get crooked. And right now I kind of want to make sure I do better than I usually do and get it straight. All right, so that little edge right here, I'm going to make sure that's in there so I don't have any little things poking out right there. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other bag. I'm going to stitch it again. And just as long as I stay away about 3/8 of an inch away from this edge, or 1/2 inch or so, you're gonna be good. Let's see if I have a ruler here. So a 1/2 inch right here is about right there. So I'll just snip it, tiny little snip, just to give myself a little bit of a guide. So just keep the flap up. So you're basically stitching about 1 inch from this edge here. Your machine wants to go straight, so if you can kind of just lightly guide it, make sure you're not getting any puckers on your flap. There we go. And the reason I did that way, I got a little bit wonky, is so that our flap kind of stays up at the top of the bag when it's open. All right, let's get rid of these threads here. And now let's attach our sides and our front together. So now we have our sides with the strap. So you're kind of getting to the point where you really need to have that hardware and your strap ready. Okay, so just pull your flap down, get it out of the way, and we'll do the back first. Okay, so line up your sides, right sides together. Keep your flap out of the way. You're going to be cutting it really close right there. Sorry about that. If this ends up becoming a problem for you, you can always do a bigger seam allowance around your flap. We won't be edge stitching the sides or anything, so you don't have to go back by there again. So now look for your corner notches and line them up. And pivot at the notch. If you need to clip it in a little deeper, go for it. Keep your strap out of the way as well. Now just pick this up and pivot right there, just like that. It's a little easier on the outer because we only have this piece, and we also don't have to deal with the thickness of the laptop sleeve, right? So I always sew things like this with the piece that needs to pivot on top. So the long narrow piece that's going on top of the whatever square or rectangle you're sewing, that piece is always on top. It's a lot easier. This is the one I can pivot really nicely. We're not leaving any holes or anything in this one. All right, so make sure you get all your threads towards the seam allowance. Kind of look at how we're doing here. I like to kind of get an idea before I'm stuck trying to ease something in. It does look like I should ease a little bit in. And then when you come to these corners, straighten this piece out and then pivot. Clip it if it needs to be clipped a little deeper. Keep your flap out of the way. Line up your tops. Just like that. Hold it firm. You can use clamps and things like that. Oh, I have quite a bit here. Ease this in a little bit. Don't really want to have to trim off the top, but it looks like I may have to in this case. Probably because my outer back is all stitched with the pockets, and it kind of made it a little smaller. Okay, I got it 1/4 of an inch off. Oops, I got a little tuck in there. Let's get rid of my tuck first. See, I have issues too. Get rid of these tucks. We know it works because we know those sides worked, right? But sometimes, like when you've done sewing to your pieces, it makes the fabric react a different way. Some of these tucks you can actually smooth out without even re-sewing. That one I may need to come back to. All right, so here we go. And so now I have this a little bit off right here, which is pretty much a bummer. If I wanted to make sure that my tops are the same as each other, which actually If I trim that off, it look like they'd match better. So one of my straps might be a little higher than the other, but I'm gonna trim this off all the way across. I'm not gonna let myself get out of that. I don't want to do it at an angle. I know some of you might, and that's fine. I've done that too, but I'm gonna try and keep it nice and square at the top. All right, so now we're gonna add our front, and we're gonna put the front down. Kind of move all this stuff to the inside, your threads to the outer edge here. Push your pockets away from the edge. Get them out of there. Just like that. And we'll lay this side on top. Make sure your strap doesn't get in the way. And we're going to do the same exact thing. Remember, this has this nice little scoop in the front there. So your seam line is really right there. That's where you line up the edge. So you have that little point sticking up of the front, just like that. See that? Okay, so find your corner. And if it migrated from the other side, you know, you need to make sure that you're doing the corner straight across from the other one. Otherwise your bag gets a little bit wonky. You know what I mean? I bet you know what I mean. So let's notch straight across. And by doing that, the way I do that is I kind of fold up these long edges along each there, just like that, and find where it's straight across. Took me years to get the hang of how to adjust my sewing when things would get off like that. It just really took sitting down and kind of seeing what happened when I did something, pretty much out of frustration, because I thought what I was doing was fixing the issue, and really it wasn't. And sometimes it's always the thing you least think will fix it, fixes it. So I kind of learned those tricks, and now they make sense to me. So I'm going to make sure my notch is right there at the pivot point. And I know where that pivot point is because I've already pivoted there once when I sewed the outer bag. And that's something you need to start thinking about, is you need to make sure you're encasing all of the stitches you put on the front of the bag. Ooh, I'm having trouble easing this in here. The wax canvas is not being very forgiving. All right, so now pivot. Let's clip that a little deeper because I did a little triangle rather than a clip. Pull that up. Make sure your pocket bags don't get stuck down there. And I'm going to try and make sure I'm encasing whatever stitching I've already sewn. See, I have this edge here I need to sew. Okay, and start looking at the end here, line it up. Come down here and see where I'm at. Hopefully it's same corner. Yep, I am, thankfully, finally. Losing that 1/4 inch kind of did me some good, but it does mean my bag is probably not even. All right, I'm going to check to see if I got my seam. I think I may have slipped there, so I may have to go back and stitch a little bit. Remember, if you're going through any zipper, that you need to walk around any teeth. Let's see, I'm going to peek inside my bag and make sure none of the stitching around the front is showing. But yeah, so just that one little spot that I saw. It's better to do it now than before you finish your bag. All right, just that one little spot down here. Right here, I can see it. All right, so now we have our bag. So we, let's see, how do we do this? All right, so we're gonna leave that inside out. Put all of this inside your bag. Now we're going to attach the lining to the bag. All right, so turn your lining right side out, even though that's not how it will be when it's finished. 3 more seams, you guys. You got this. And the third one is just closing the hole. All right, so now put your bag front to front inside. Let me get my flap a little flatter in there and my strap a little bit less discombobulated so that the front doesn't push up against anything. Get it really deep in there. And you're going to line up your seams. And I usually try and start like on the side or on the back, kind of near these guys, just because I like to get those secure. And I like to push my seams opposite ways of each other, and I'm consistent from one side to the other, but it's not a big deal. It's all going to get pushed into the bag. So I usually will push the outer fabric out because it's stiffer, and then the lining to the inside of the sides, just like this. And this just reduces the bulk there. You can do all of them one way, you can do them the opposite way, it just depends. All right, so I'm going to sew from the inside here. 1/4 inch seam along the top. And remember, when we get to our flap area, it's going to be a little bit tight because our flap's really close to the edge there. See, it's right there. Just remember, just pull it down a little bit, kind of prime it. And your lining has the thickness of the laptop sleeve on it. But this, as weird as it seems, this actually goes usually really, really well. As long as all your seam allowances were good when you put your sides together, even if things got a little bit mismatched, I just kind of crept off my edge there. As long as your side seams, your sides, you kept those seam allowances consistent. Even if the tops were off, it doesn't matter at this point. As long as your seam allowances for the circumference of the bag is the same, you're good to go. That little hump of the flap could push you off, just like it did me because I wasn't really paying attention there. Keep all those threads there, and plus you can see my padding is kind of sticking up. So I'm trying to keep this lining, the raw edge there, to the top there. So we just have this, and we're going to top stitch the top edge and close the bag, and we're done. I don't like this padding. It kind of gets bigger as I use it. It's kind of a weird stuff. It likes to ooch. It's kind of slimy. But it does have some nice loft. All right, so now I'm to my sides, and I'm again, like splitting the seam thicknesses away from each other. Now, some of the things you could do to make this easier for you is, tops stitch your lining to your padding before, and trimming it all up so all your edges are lined up. You're not trying to find them like I am right now. You could clamp it or pin it. But like I said, when you get to these sides and stuff, the seams, it really helps. They kind of lock in together. The whole bag wants to line up. This is one of the easier steps for being so pivotal in the bag construction. All the way. Back stitch. Make sure you caught everything. Look inside these layers. Look at that. I barely caught that there. So let's do that a little deeper. Do it from this side so I can make sure. Be a little easier. Reinforce it a little bit. All right, and so now we're going to turn our bag through the hole of the lining. Okay, and now your bag is actually inside out as well. Because of the way we did this. I did this the easy way. So you're going to stick your hand in the lining hole and push out your bag like this. Do it now. while you can. It's a little trickier. I know you're really excited to see your bag, but it's worth it doing this part right here because it'll look really good right when you do it. All right, now let's close the hole of our lining. I find ironing this bit to be make it a little easier, especially if this hole gets a little stretched out while you're turning the bag. My other one did because it was a lot stiffer than this wax cotton and it was a lot bigger bag. Okay, so just line this up. Don't worry about how this looks really. No one's gonna see this part. Just edge stitch it. You can hand stitch it if you really want to. But I always machine stitch it. Make sure you don't leave any holes. You don't want anything slipping into the lining of your bag. Get rid of any threads. Look for anything else. There's our water bottle sleeve. This is so exciting. Oh, I got some threads right here I want to get rid of. All right, so now let's put the lining into the bag. Open it up like this and push it in. That laptop sleeve is pretty chunky, but once it's inside the bag, it's pretty well behaved. All right, now we're going to edge stitch the top edge and then we're done. All right, so this part is a little bit finicky when you're kind of going across this back edge right here. Like I keep saying. So I'm just going to get it going and then I'm going to arrange it as I go. So let's see, let's start right about here. Remember, you have the padding of the back in there, and that does create a little bit of kind of pushback. So just kind of work it in there. See that? I got this little edge. You know, keep your flap out of the way. Push it down. And, you know, I would rather stitch from the right side. It would be a lot easier to stitch from the inside. So if you feel like that's all you can handle right now and you're kind of like, I'm done with wrestling, bag wrestling, lady, do that. You know, start and sew from the lining side facing up and just make sure you keep your flap out of the way. If your bobbin thread isn't that great, or you can handle it, I would sew from the right side of the bag. But it just means that your bag is going to be sitting like this, kind of in an awkward position. But when I sew it this way, I can also ensure that none of my lining is kind of creeping to the right side because I can see it really well. So see, now you know why we left a 3/8 of an inch clearance. You can kind of see that I only have about 1/8 of an inch for this top stitch right here. And I've sewn this a couple times where I didn't get that clearance and I just went up to the flap, back stitch, and then hopped over the flap, you know, right there and kept going. You don't really notice it once the flap is on the bag and kind of draped over it. Oof, I'm falling off. It's a little thick right there. I'll have to do a better job. I'm really trying to rush for this video. Sorry. Okay. But we're almost done. It's so exciting. It was such a fun project to let you guys design this bag and then do all the pattern drafting for it. It was like I had a client. And I really miss those days. All right, almost there. My glass bag. Trim the thread. You have to trim the threads before you look. All right, so here we go. Here is my flap with the zipper. Oh, I like this size a lot. This is pretty cute. Relative to me, that's the size. We've got our gusset pockets for the glasses and a phone. pockets galore in there. We have our laptop sleeve. This 80% size is still pretty nifty. And then we have our strap. There we go. And then here's your handle. Good job, you guys. That was no small feat. I know. It was kind of a lot of features, but pretty cool that you finished that, isn't it? All right, well, show me that you made it. I really want to know, you guys, if you made one of these. You can hashtag it idealbag and join us live on So Live if you ever want, and hang out with us. It's really fun. And happy sewing. Thank you.